The following content is provided under a Creative Commons license. Your support will help MIT OpenCourseware continue to offer high-quality educational resources for free. To make a donation or view additional materials from hundreds of MIT courses, visit MIT OpenCourseware at ocw.mit.edu.
This is a work of popular imagination, so it's Robert Louis Stevenson's take on his creation of an incredibly clever story. This book has been widely read. It could be one of the most famous novellas ever written. Who doesn't know Jekyll and Hyde? I mean, people who've never even read the book. You say Jekyll and Hyde, they say, oh yeah, Jekyll and Hyde. So it's deeply connected to popular culture, widely known, and certainly one of Stevenson's most successful works. It sold something like 40,000 copies in the first few months, and it was an immediate sensation, and very highly reflective intellectuals thought of this book as an amazing revelation of something about the fundamental duality of people. That people contain more than just these sort of rational selves. They contain these other parts to their fundamental nature. And in some ways, Stevenson is probing deeper into the psyche, trying to understand, some of the elements that are present, even though they may not be expressed. So, what is what is Jekyll and Hyde? What's the story? What's the basic story? What happens in the book? Charles.
Well, the author, Stevenson, takes a long time to get to the actual transformation.
Yeah. So there's a build-up, isn't there?
Yeah.
The first part is this build-up, this mystery, the dark streets of London at night, and these are the streets where unknown entities, people walk, where strange things can happen.
Kind of like a detective story.
Yeah.
I thought it's like a mystery.
It has the elements of a mystery novel. It's certainly presented as a series of strange events. Mm-hmm. How do we understand these strange events? The trampling of the little girl, the killing of Sir Danvers Carew, and all this scurrying about in the laboratory. So, yeah.
Almost all of it comes to us through narrative or stories, whether it be through letters or about going on walks with someone and relaying, you're not going to believe what I saw the other night or such and such. And I personally found that to be such a powerful way to convey it, because you're wanting to know, you're already getting secondhand information. So really, I thought that was a very powerful technique.
Stevenson is an absolutely brilliant writer.
And the funny thing was, when I read, I don't know if Wikipedia is on the mark here, but I said that apparently after, decades after it was published, these literary, people decided that, maybe he really wasn't that great of a writer, and they kind of dismissed it. And then apparently he's been left out of a lot of American literature studies, both in educational curricula, and otherwise, because some pretentious, people thought he wasn't worth it, and only now are they starting to look back. And I don't see how anyone could read that book and possibly say that that's the work of a second-rate writer, really.
I agree. I have a quote in there. Nabokov said, "It was a fable belonging to the same order of art as Madame Bovary." The sort of the moral. Well, the moral complexity and the moral, the sort of penetrating revelation of at the core of the psyche of this very complex set of tensions and the fact that there was more in the unconscious than people had formerly thought. And somehow Jekyll and Hyde pulls out of this deep self, this other self. And we say, oh yeah, this is an exaggeration. But you know, we have expressions, I mean, if you follow the popular news or the news accounts of any year cycle, you will find a number of brutal murders and things of that sort that happen. I mean, it's not as though this is a completely unique tale. I mean, look what's happening in the trial up in New Hampshire right now. This kid who hacked this poor lady at night while she was sleeping. I mean, humans have these potentials, and somehow Stevenson got at something. There's another comment here by Gerard Manley Hopkins, who wrote to a friend. Hopkins was an incredible poet. He said, "You are certainly wrong about Hyde being overdrawn. My Hyde is worse." So I mean, people really identified with this other self, and it fit into a lot of the sort of fallout from Darwin's work. I mean, it's not a direct interpretation of Darwin, or any, you know, but Darwin kind of connected the natural world with the world of civilization, and brought he pulled the psyche together in his work in a way that made it impossible to separate the civilized from the natural. And he connected ancestral forms with forms of contemporary time. Yeah, David.
Yeah, I was wondering, like, as the story progressed, Jekyll sort of felt compelled to keep becoming Hyde. Mm-hmm. So I was wondering if that was like a commentary on how, despite civilization's sort of restrictions, protective restrictions, that like human nature will eventually prevail or not. I don't know if that was.
Well, it's a good question. I mean, it absolutely is one of the key questions here. Is what is being explored here? What are some of the attractions to? Okay, so we have this very urbane gentleman, Dr. Jekyll, who is at the top of. He's got everything a person could want. He's successful. He's got friends. He's got wealth. What else does he need? Why is he attracted into this kind of bizarre experiment? I mean, obviously, the chemicals or whatever they are, that's just a kind of a deus ex machina. I mean, it's just who knows what Stevenson had in mind there.
He couldn't describe the exact, in his letter, he's like, I can't go into the exact details.
Well, so it's intriguing though. Are there chemicals that can transform people's psyche? Are there? Jennifer?
Antidepressants are.
Yeah.
Huh?
That's what antidepressants are.
Okay, antidepressants, which I don't think were around in those days, but what was around in those days?
Opium?
Opium.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So, what about opium? Does opium, Charles?
I consider the possibility of, like, when you're reading this book and, like, you kind of take into account how Stevenson presents the use of this unknown drug over a period of time, and how Dr. Jekyll kind of lapses into like a really bad state that he can't escape from. I was thinking about whether or not this was like a commentary on like kind of the effects that drugs can have on people and how they affect people like just mentally and maybe physically, And obviously here it would be an exaggeration, but I think that, like, I was thinking about that question, and I got at the very end, like, no, it's not. That's not the point of the book. It's not to like say, oh, drugs are bad for you. It's
Right,
like,
right, yeah,
It's like
yeah.
beside the point, like so.
But
As
as
a
a mechanism to, you know, support, to advance the plot. Yeah, there were opium dens all over London, and people went there, and respectable people, quote. And I have a slide here from, yeah, this is Confessions of an Opium Eater by Thomas de Quincey, one of the great classics of 19th century literature. And de Quincey became addicted to opium. And he sort of, he explored the world of addiction. And in his exploration of this world, he wrote this account. It's a very famous, wonderful little book. If you ever get a chance, do read it. It's a classic. He says, but here's just one little quote from it. I thus give the reader some slight abstraction of my oriental dreams. So this is kind of the way he puts it, which always filled me with such amazement at the monstrous scenery that horror seemed absorbed for a while in sheer astonishment. Sooner or later came a reflux of feeling that swallowed up the astonishment and left me not so much in terror as in hatred and abomination what I saw. Over every form and threat and punishment and dim and sightless incarceration brooded a sense of eternity, an infinity that drove me into an oppression as of madness. Into these dreams only it was, with one or two slight exceptions, that any circumstances of physical horror entered. All before had been moral and spiritual terrors. But here the main agents were ugly birds or snakes or crocodiles, especially the last. Well, he's, you know, he's hallucinating. He's gone into, but it was, you know, it was something in the undercurrent of Victorian society that, you know, there were opium dens, that people, I mean, opium was widely used. There were no restrictions on it as there are now. It was used for medical purposes too, but these dens. And you have here Gustave Doré's etching of opium den. And you can see the kind of, you know, the mystery, the night, and the dark sort of brooding obscurity of it. So these were things that were definitely known. And Stevenson was the type of person who would have explored to the fullest all these different realms. I mean, Stevenson himself was a traveler of the same scope as Darwin and Wallace and all these other Victorians who were studying science. Stevenson traveled the world over, and he lived in many, many different parts of the world. So he was, and he obviously had come across opium in the East and also in London. So some of these, when we read Hyde, just one of the transformations. So this is just, you know, just to compare here. This is just after he. This is in chapter, the chapter where Jekyll's full statement of the case. And just after he describes his feeling after he drank the potion. The most racking pangs succeeded, a grinding in the bones, deadly nausea, and a horror of the spirit that cannot be exceeded at the hour of birth or death. Think of De Quincey here. That these agonies began swiftly to subside, and I came to myself as if out of a great sickness. There was something strange in my sensations, something indescribably new, and from its very novelty, incredibly sweet. I felt younger, lighter, happier in body. Within I was conscious of a heady recklessness, a current of disordered sensual images running like a mill race in my fancy, a solution of the bonds of obligation, an unknown but not an innocent freedom of the soul. I knew myself at the first breath of this new life to be more wicked, tenfold more wicked, sold a slave to my original evil, and thought in that moment braced and delighted me like wine. I stretched out my hands, exulting in the freshness of sensations, and in fact I was suddenly aware that I had lost in stature. It's quite a passage, because it kind of it duplicates this kind of this sense of drug-induced haze and transformation. But in doing that, what else does it? What's some of the other imagery that's coming in here? Jake.
Well, it's like he said, he felt like more free, but like in an evil way.
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't have to deal with society. Excuse me, society's like orders and laws and laws that just kind of free to do what you want, but at the same time, he says it's not like a good, happy free. It's like I'm completely free to do like anything I want, which includes all those things that are protected against by society's laws, mores, customs, and all that stuff.
Yeah, so this sense of freedom is freedom from the bonds of society. What are the bonds of society?
Well, the law of society has like the written law, obviously, but also, like the social contract, like how you interact with people, and then every society has its own customs and mores and all those things. Like the unspoken laws that you wear clothes when you meet someone and you shake their hand, things like that.
I just wear clothes.
Yeah.
Too big for
Well,
No, but it's a good point. It's all that stuff that Alice is learning as she's becoming from a little girl up into it's what children learn. I mean, think of what children learn in order to be members of society. I mean, there's an incredible amount of. I mean, most of us have forgotten it. It's become so ingrained in the way that we operate, but we once had to learn it. I mean, have you ever watched little tiny kids in the sandbox? You have to watch and make sure they don't bop each other over the head, when they want something. There's all this learning that we do in order to become adults and members of society. And that also constrains our action, does it not? I mean, we don't agree that people should go out and do whatever they feel like. We all agree that there, as Jake says, there's a kind of a contract. We agree to behave within some reasonable boundary, but the possibilities of ourselves and action are much greater than that. So in some sense, Hyde is feeling released from these boundaries and the feeling of freedom he describes as a sense of wine or a sense of exhilaration. Did you bring it down?
I don't know when the right time to bring this up is, but the most terrifying part about this whole book I found is that sure, it discusses this notion of separating the good in a man from the bad, but what really disturbed me is that when I took a closer inspection of it, in that separation, over time, Hyde just becomes more powerful, and Jekyll just stays in this kind of miserable state. So even once you try, even through the use of chemical-induced, separation, the good in the person still becomes this kind of mess ball of just misery, and I don't know quite what the final message was there, because Hyde goes off and is continuing to just ramp up energy, and Jekyll is just falling apart as a man, and that was really disturbing to me, and I don't know if the answer is as simple as that they just can't be separated, or this kind of universal suffering regardless of how you separate out the good from bad. So you can be the
Hyde kept growing in stature. It mentioned at the end, like he was still smaller than Jekyll, but it said that he was growing, and so I think maybe like at the beginning he represented like that 1/10 of his nature, and then all of a sudden he was growing and taking it over gradually as Jekyll was declining.
Yeah, there's some complexity in this question of how to interpret the tale, because clearly Jekyll, once he loses the ability to transform himself back, he can't find the right chemicals and so forth, and there's that whole episode in the cabinet in the laboratory where this Hyde is running around desperately trying to figure out how to reconcoct the potion that will enable him to transform back into Jekyll. You realize there is, at least in the story, there's a loss of control. The controlled experiment of losing oneself by removing the bonds of society loses it becomes something that gets out of control. And it's in some ways it's a tale. There are elements in this tale that are not unlike Wiener, and the magic of what was Wiener's take on magic and science. The sense of course Wiener's much later, but the sense that we look for shortcuts and easy ways to achieve things sometimes through various kinds of mechanisms and magic. But I mean, isn't this parallel in some ways to the Sorcerer's Apprentice? I mean, he became the apprentice. He lost the ability to find the way back, and in that state he couldn't face or couldn't endure the future. He couldn't live as Hyde. So Hyde at first was this kind of evening thing. And it also maps on to addiction of various sorts. The first stage of addiction being, this incredible sense of freedom and so on. I'm talking like I know, right? But we know the tale, the narrative of the addicted one, and that is the first stage is this incredible sense of newness and freedom and so on and so forth, and then gradually the dependency becomes greater, and the ability to rescue oneself from the addiction becomes weaker and weaker. So this could also be, like I said, mapped onto opium addiction. Okay, yeah.
One question, because we were talking about like Hyde running around the lab trying to find the chemicals to go back to Jekyll. But what I didn't quite understand there was like, so he could be in Hyde's form, but then have Jekyll's frame of mind. That's where I got a little bit.
He was unable to transform back to Jekyll.
So why didn't he? Like, why would Hyde want to be Jekyll?
Good question. What are some of the why? It's a discussable question, and that is, it could be that 100% Hyde just was too much, too punishing or too difficult to sustain. What are some other possibilities?
Well, the book describes them having the same memory, and so they share the same memory. Maybe like to some lesser extent, they share the same like consciousness and like same like maybe different. They have different impulses, but they still have the same rationality. Like just the original, like Dr. Jekyll's mind, but just with his nature twisted when he's Mr. Hyde, and so like he can still think clearly. He needs to escape from. Like he knows that when he's in Mr. Hyde form, he knows that he's gonna get punished because maybe he did something bad. And he after night he clubbed someone to death. Maybe he needed to escape, and so maybe he'll find like to survive for Mr. Hyde's survival.
Okay, maybe that's yeah. Hyde himself doesn't seem to. I mean, he has no problem with these events, these violent things that he's done. He tries to cover his tracks. David?
One thing to keep in mind maybe is maybe to Hyde, like, he's not evil, and that the definition of evil was set by society. So, like, when people say they looked upon the face of evil, you know, maybe to them, but not to Hyde himself. And so when Hyde is trying to look for the cure, the medicine to become Jekyll again, maybe that was society sort of societal pressures acting on the more primitive nature of humans.
Okay.
I can see reasons as well that don't need to resort to any kind of, you know, intellectual consideration, because Hyde lives in Jekyll's lab, and Hyde is also remarkably parasitic, and we see scenes in the book where whenever Hyde is out in, you know, public and is running about rampant, crowds gather around him, and they're very upset, and that Hyde still very much has an umbilical cord attached to Jekyll, because while people in the while, you know, Mr. Poole and all that are told, you know, you let Hyde in, you do whatever you want, as soon as Jekyll starts, if Jekyll were to disappear from the landscape, there would be a problem, and Mr. Poole and all these other people would start going into the laboratory, and if they find this kind of enraged creature in there, Hyde's done for. I mean, he can run all he wants, but once there's an angry London mob after him, he's screwed. So he knows he needs Jekyll to feed off of, you know, to be able to give in from societal pressures. So it's like, I think the other points are completely valid, but on a very basic level, he needs Jekyll to be able to survive, and, you know, Masquerade is his.
He can't endure with himself, because he can't, you know, theoretically he has been in the will made out as the recipient of Jekyll's fortune.
But Lord knows that if you actually try to go to a meeting, you know, that's not going to go too well. So.
But he can't. He needs an enabling entity, and that's Jekyll. So in some sense, they're mutually dependent.
Maybe parasitic isn't the right term, but in like a bacterial sense almost, you know, that he's thriving off of Jekyll's own, you know,
I think
flesh
that respectability and so forth is something he can escape back into, and thus escape the consequences of his deeds. So what is the what is the connection then to Darwin and Darwinism and things of that sort? I mean, it's not being offered as a direct interpretation of Darwin, but it's you know, cultural references to scientific works are not literal in the sense of you know, they don't just try to do something straightforward with them. It's generally highly suggestive. So what are some of the elements that get reflected in this? What about instinct? How does instinct figure into this? Does it? Are any of these things? Yeah, Craig.
No, you still have this kind of animal instinct that maybe we're not quite as evolved as we tend to think of ourselves. So we still retain this part of like animal, part of this beast within us that just always wants to get out, no matter how rational and how sophisticated we think we are.
Okay, that's one. Yeah, Tom. You had your hand up.
I guess like Hyde kind of just represents that like instinct, like the basic animal instinct that we all had at some point before we evolved into
But
awareness.
animals, that's like my problem with the whole
I mean,
thing.
like, not
Animals
all-
aren't like super aggressive.
Not
trying
all
to-
animals
cute.
are like nice and cute and fluffy,
Yeah, like
though.
what happened to
I
Kitty?
mean,
No.
But
Yeah, there are
but
some.
we all know that, you know, there are animals and instincts that are very powerful. Alligators and crocodiles, you know.
Yeah.
Whereas Hyde just kind of runs
He's
around.
doing it for pleasure.
Yeah.
Yeah, he takes it a little too far, definitely.
Yeah.
But I mean, I can I
Yeah.
can see where it would be like a basis.
But and keep in mind, this is you know, this is sort of we're in the realm of fantasy here too, detective and fantasy and all these things. So things do get exaggerated, but you know, the powerful impulses. This is non-rational behavior. Not so? I mean, this is behavior that has to be connected to something other than, you know, the rational mind of what to do, you know, because that's the world of the ethic and so forth. So, yeah. David.
It was commenting on how society evolved individual, like with all the rules and the laws. Like without them, we'd just all become Hyde, and almost. But
Yeah.
It's saying that without some kind of structure, we're all primitive. Even with the structure, it can still break out of us at some level.
Okay, that's certainly what I think most people in Stevenson's time. That's how they interpreted this work, as, you know, identifying the boundary between good and evil, because there was still a very powerful sense of you know, the religious basis of culture. Yeah.
In line with non-rationality, I think here we see a reflection of Malthus's compound being.
Okay, we're back to Malthus too. Yes.
In which you know, we shouldn't always think of man as just this linear, rational being.
Okay.
He may also deviate.
Yeah, there's some kind of content in the mind that we're not necessarily aware of, but that under certain circumstances gains the potential for expression. And this can be something of great surprise and catastrophe. Yeah.
I was going to bring this up earlier, but I think that one of the things that is explored in this book is the one, like, I think if you we were talking just now about the rules or like the bounds that society places on people, and I think that one key thing is that every person is associated with one credit or with one reputation, and like that's one of the things I feel that goes on in this book, and it's not just with Dr. Jekyll, it's also with some of his friends. Forget the name, it's an uncommon name, but like just people are concerned about the reputation, and like it's and in introducing Mr. Hyde, it's like an escape from having to be this a well-behaved person. Like Dr. Jekyll can't just start misbehaving and doing whatever he wants, because he built a reputation, and all of that is going to fall apart, and he's not going to stay the same. Society is not going to see him as the same person if he just does random stuff and like goes around like killing people and stuff. And so like it's kind of like we're only assigned one credit, and that's kind of boring. And we build up to be something that's like accepted, that can be accepted in society, because that's how we want to live. We want to live where people respect us, and like we are in a position of power. We have money, right? And like people, like when you're well respected, people feel nice to be. Right? But then like occasionally maybe it gets boring, and then you want a different credit. You can't just like change characters on a
Well,
computer
it
game.
certainly is part of what, you know, he is kind of there's an aspect of fatigue in the Jekyll that we first encounter. I mean, he's had it all. He's succeeded. And so in some kind of dilettante way, he wants to explore these other possibilities, because, he has arrived at a point where his life does not offer much that is new or exciting. And of course, his scientific researches, such as they are, they never get too clear about that in here, but this is one of his areas of interest, and it has led him into this world of possibility, where he can become something else. What is it, I mean, to become someone else? What is the attraction of becoming someone else? Casey.
I mean, like, maybe you don't like everything about yourself and you wish you could just, you know, behave in a different way, but you're so, like, set in your ways that you can't just be like, oh, today I'm going to do this instead, you know? But if you're, like, becoming a completely different person, you know, you can act completely differently than you normally would without really the consequences of how it would be in your real life.
You can, you know, go into Second Life and get your avatar up and, hey, go off and do fantastic things. Or World of Warcraft and go out and, you know, sink a couple of, I mean, yeah, there's something attractive about becoming somebody else. I mean, I don't know if you ever gone to some kind of a costume party or something like that, but certainly little children absolutely love dressing up and doing this and doing that, and it sort of reveals something fundamental about us, the ability to escape ourselves. Don't you get bored with yourself sometime, or you know, there's something about the world that you inhabit sometimes becomes, you know, it's just so
Depends how self-absorbed you are, I guess.
Yeah.
well, everybody has this impulse sometime, I'm sure, but so it builds on that a little bit. Yeah, and there's some sense in there that he's purged himself, or that he's, you know, he's somehow gotten rid of some urge or need that he can't express as Jekyll. Jake.
That whole, what you said about purging that need and like feeling refreshed, really made me think about vacations.
Yeah.
Because I mean, he's like vacationing, I guess, from his Dr. Jekyll self.
His
But,
El Dorado.
at the same time, well, he's not. You don't act the same way on vacation as you do in your real life. You don't sleep until noon and then stay out all night at the bar or on the beach or go swimming or just lazy or whatever. But at the same time, you can't always be on vacation. You need to also go to work your 7 days or 7 days a week. If you're 5 days a week, however, otherwise vacation ceases to be vacation anymore.
So it's a
not-
change.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it brings us back to Devin's question: is what is the takeaway from the book? Because it's obviously complex in many different ways. Even though the tale itself, it's actually very. I mean, the prose is very. It's excellent prose. It's smooth and supple, and you know, these characters, even though they're not drawn with a lot of complexity, are they? I mean, is this a little more, isn't this a little, the character, well, let me ask you, what do you think of the complexity of the character? Are we in the realm of, say, Candide, these sort of comic book matchstick characters, or are we in a more complex world? What would you say about, you know, the way in which the kind of world that he creates, you know, the big canvas here? What are some of the things that we can take away just as far as, you know, what this world that at the end of the book that has emerged is? Have we been somehow told, well, you know, humans should really explore their evil selves, this is good? Or have we been told that, you know, doing this you do at your peril and that society will punish you? So what's Stevenson telling us, if anything? Maybe he's just trying to tell a great tale. Lauren.
Maybe he didn't over-complexify the characters so that
a person could easily project themselves into the story and think about how the story might fit into their own lives, or like, oh, do I have this evil side, or do I know people like this? Just because it's easier to compare when something.
Okay. Yeah, it's simplified. It's a simplified story. The characters are not that complex. And it's a short novella. Very, very accessible, very readable, and it pulls you through it with a fair amount. If you haven't read it before, I mean, when I reread it, I'm always, I get into that chapter on Jekyll's account of himself, and it always grabs me again. But even so, these are not complicated characters in the sense of finely textured and all these different interactions and so forth that bring out the nuances of character.
But the most dangerous ideas should be expressed in the simplest terms.
Stevenson seems to speak to, even though the story is not what we would say is highly wrought, somehow he's touched a nerve that speaks to people who have lots and lots of who are highly sophisticated, and yet this tale pulls them back into it because it says something fundamentally true about self and the self-reflection, in the sense that we all wonder about ourselves and whether we are within the realm of acceptability, or so this is a natural human anxiety. People like Gerard Manley Hopkins, who was a Catholic priest, he read it and he said his Hyde was much worse, and you think, hey, come on, Gerard, what did you do? That was so, I mean, the man was absolutely phenomenal poet. He wrote beautiful letters. He was a Catholic priest, and yet he identified as somebody who has the problem of Hyde. So it just shows, it just reveals that there are fundamental senses we all have of, many people have of, guilt and a sense that they have transgressed, even when by normal standards you'd say, there's no evidence of that.
Going back to our discussions before on machines kind of becoming beings with their own intentions, it seems like almost in society now we're allowing ourselves to create hides that can coexist at the same time with machines. Like, I was just thinking, because my grandpa was in World War II and he flew bombing planes, and he said that while there was an objective and he knew that he had to do something for his country and for a certain cause, there was a certain guilt that he felt because he had been the one up there dropping bombs on supposedly some very innocent people that didn't deserve anything like that. But now there are robots, planes that are mechanized, and people are just sitting thousands of miles away pressing buttons, and all of a sudden the conscience again is separated from it. And it's at least with Hyde and Jekyll, they were distinct and they couldn't coexist all at once. But then now people with machines, it's a little bit of a scary thought that they could in a way create a Hyde and satisfy those cravings and at the same time be completely morally separated from it.
Can our machines become our Hydes?
Exactly.
That's a very good topic for a paper. Trying to do a paper on Jekyll and Hyde and Wiener and and Butler's machines. This would be a great way to pull it together. Yeah, no, that's a good point. I mean, these mechanical devices are expressions of ourselves, and they're in some sense expressions of our psyche. And our psyche has content that is not always conscious. And a lot of it isn't conscious. And we know that some of this content is full of aggression. We're going to read Huxley for next class. So Huxley's Evolution and Ethics, and Huxley sort of explores this problem of aggression, and the fact that part of the instinctual behavior of organisms is, as Casey was saying, can be violent and aggressive. It's there, and it's a natural part of it's a natural part of the self. Well, just a few words on this whole, this novel in some ways partakes of a kind of discourse that was taking place at the end of this century that did some kind of variation. It drew a little bit from evolutionary theory, because there was this notion in evolution, as Claire mentioned, of reversion and atavism. This sense of expression of more primal characteristics, and the fact that within the self contained the entire repertory of psychological and instinctual behavior. And yes, we had developed these filters through civilization and culture for it, but they're still there someplace. And this hooked into a lot of discussion at the end of the century of what has sometimes been called fin-desiecle cultural thinking. And that is, at the end of the century, there was this sense that of apocalyptic, that things were coming to an end. And a lot of this was inspired by certain kinds of metaphors built on evolution. One of Darwin's colleagues, a younger colleague, E. Ray Lankester, wrote a book titled Degeneration, a chapter in Darwinism, in which he gave an account. It's an interesting little book. There's a lot of biology in it, and he talks a lot about forms that are degenerated forms. And we have to be careful with his language here, because we sometimes come back to this question of devolution. Is there such a thing as devolution? I mean, evolution continues to go forward, and whatever species change takes place is an advance of some kind on what took place before, because it's more able to succeed. And in some of these highly stable environments, what happens is organisms that live in highly stable environments with very predictable food sources and means of survival will sometimes become more simplified in their adult forms. And this process was called degeneration. Darwin called it reversion. And what it really meant was the change from a more complex form to a simpler form through time. And like I said, it was largely the result of highly stable environments. So if you're sitting at the bottom of the ocean in a nutrient stream, where you really don't have to move that much to get your source of food, what happens to your biology over long periods of time, millennia we're talking, well, huge periods of time, thousands of generations, what's likely to happen? Chris?
It stabilizes because there's no need to change. There's no need for natural selection for...
Well, there's no need to retain as complex a function set, if you will, as you would need in your ancestral form if it were more competitive and more in environments where there were more where there was more change. So these highly stable environments. One is the inside of the body. Huge parasites. Lots and lots of parasites have developed in the body that have lost a lot of their functionality in terms of ability to move and so forth. Tapeworms, things of this sort. They simply attach to a steady flow of food source and basically just open their mouths and or partake of the food stream, and over thousands of generations they become simplified because it takes more energy to maintain a more complex organism, more complex nervous system and so forth. And these little tunicates were talked about, Lancaster talked about in his Degeneration, and their juvenile forms had all this complexity. You see the juvenile at the top, and then in the more adult forms, the maturing forms, they actually became highly simplified. They lost a part of the nervous system, and so on and so forth. And they lost the ability to move, and they changed their physiology changed to something in the adult stage that was much more simplified than the juvenile stage. So Lancaster took this as an example, and the size of the organism populations of degenerated organisms, I'm using Lancaster's term here now, is huge. Parasites are it's a vast field. And almost all parasites and certain types of organism, like tunicates that live at the bottom of the ocean, and all they do is they just sort of filter the stream as it comes past them, and they get everything they need from that, so they can become much more viable with far less physiology. And so they actually become simplified. And it's a huge phenomenon. But then Lancaster, studying this form, applied it to civilization and culture. And somewhat outrageously, because it was he was trying to argue for more for investment in scientific education, actually. The concept that degeneration expresses is sort of, it's almost moral. It's almost like applying morality to biological change, because degenerate and degeneration is a phrase that is kind of, it's a highly negative concept, that something degenerated, something became less than it could be, and so on. So Lancaster's book, which, as much as I know of the biology of it, is a pretty good little book. But then he kind of gets off into this whole riff on how, cultures and societies, if they don't strive to improve themselves and educate themselves and become more knowledgeable, will degenerate into simpler societies that will become, in some sense, corrupt. And this fit into some of these notions that at the end of the century, societies were becoming degenerated. They were becoming more corrupt. They were becoming less morally efficient or effective. I didn't quite find the right word there. But this notion of cultural atrophy, which was just a totally crazy idea. It's sort of, but it fit in with his notion. And then part of his argument was that, well, we need to invest in science education so we can educate people and teach them. We can spread the educational resources, and his conclusion is that this will improve the society and prevent it from degenerating. So it just shows you the way in which some of these metaphors in culture were based on biological origins, but oftentimes in really crazy ways, in ways that are not very defensible. And the only reason Lancaster could get away with it was because he was a very fine scientist, and he could make these arguments, and he was respected. But it was a case of somebody making an argument that had some meaning in biology and biological framework, but then when they pulled out into trying to apply it to cultural, it sort of became nonsensical almost.